questions to the minimum, not long dissertations on your philosophy of life. Just keep to the point, and we'll do them at the end. Okay. So now we just carry on. So number 4, the supreme oral instruction is to observe the mind at all times. So this is something which has been advised by just about everybody, the Buddha himself, of course, Guru Padmasambhava, Milarepa, Atisha, and then on later to all the great masters. Buddhism is about understanding the mind and recognizing that our whole reality depends on the mind. I'm not saying that it's all mind-made insofar as that there's nothing out there, we're just projecting our own movie. It's not as simple as that. But nonetheless, what we do observe is mostly dependent on the mind which observes it. And even in a very obvious level, different people experience things in very different ways, and you get their accounts later. You see how we project so much of our understanding onto the bare data, which is actually a very, very rough data, which is received through the actual sense doors. It's the sense consciousness and then the actual mind itself, the samskaras, which then create what we perceive to be our reality. So it all depends on the mind, and therefore it's very important to understand the mind. And so when it says to observe the mind, of course, that also can be understood on 2 levels. First of all, to understand the flow of the mind, in the sense of the mind, the mental factors, the thoughts and feelings, and also to begin to observe that which observes the actual nature of the mind. But here we'll keep to the first meaning, which is that once we have learned how to observe our breath and have cultivated the ability to be aware, have cultivated that ability to stand back and observe, and meantime the mind, because our ability to be aware is so much stronger, therefore the background noise, the background flow of conceptual thinking was quietened down a bit. Still there, but it's not so completely tumultuous. I mean, it's described like in the beginning, it's like the Niagara Falls, and then gradually it becomes more like a river flowing. So by the time we've got to the river flowing, then we exchange the object from the breathing to the mind itself, the flow, the mind stream. And so there it is described as, normally, because the mind is like a river, we're usually in the middle of the river and just being swept along by the river, right? We are the river. We're just completely subsumed with our thoughts, our emotions, our memories, our aspirations, our hopes, our fears, everything. We're just right in the middle of it, being swept along. So now what we're doing, having cultivated the ability to just observe, to be aware, we are now turning that searchlight back onto the mind itself. And instead of being in the middle of the river swept along, we are now sitting on the banks of the river. We're not stopping the river, we're not damming up the river. We want a river, but we don't want to be in the middle of it. We are now on the bank watching the river going by. So that is to observe the mind. We are here in formal practice. We do not make any judgments about the thoughts, the quality of the thoughts. This is a good thought, that's a stupid thought. Oh, God, how could I think like that? And so forth. We're just observing thoughts as thoughts. Do you understand? We're not thinking good thoughts, bad thoughts. They're just thoughts. I mean, our problem is that we identify with the thoughts, and also that we believe our thoughts. We think because we are thinking it must be true. But once we begin to observe the thoughts, we realize that this is nonsense. Actually, just because we are thinking a thought doesn't make it more or less true. It's just a thought. Do you understand? I mean, like our memories. You know, we all have memories and we think that's exactly how it was. But then if you meet someone else from that time and they're describing the same thing, you say, what? No, that didn't happen like that. Because we all perceive things in different ways, and then we remember what those particular points we remember, other things we completely forget. But we believe our memories. We think that's how it was. But it's only if we can check up that we discover, no, it wasn't how it was. It's how I saw it at that time, at the age I was, with the kind of mindset which I applied to that particular event. So it's not true, it's just how I happen to have remembered it. So therefore, as we begin to look at our thoughts, we begin to recognize I am not the thoughts. Because if we were our thoughts, we couldn't observe them. Right? The fact that we have another level of consciousness which can be trained to stand apart and observe or witness means that we are not that which is being witnessed. Do you understand? Otherwise we couldn't step back from our mind and observe the thoughts. But we can observe the thoughts. And that's because we have, if we consider the mind, then one could say that the thinking mind, our ordinary, everyday, conceptual thinking mind, which is zumping along, is the gross level of the mind. The most gross level of the mind is our thinking mind. And a more subtle level of the mind is the awareness mind, the mindfulness mind, right? That's a more subtle level. And to be able to cultivate that more subtle level, to observe the more gross level, is already a big step forward. To be able to witness the mind without being swept along by it is already really a very, very big step forward. It's not ultimate reality, but it's a big step forward. After that comes the very subtle mind, which we dealt with this morning, the nature of the mind, which is the unity of the empty quality of the mind. Empty like space, because we cannot grasp it, we cannot touch it, we cannot see it or smell it. But it's all pervading, it's everywhere, like space. So that level of consciousness is empty, because it's not something solid that you can hold on to and grasp at. But at the same time, it's not unlike space, it's not nothing. I mean, it's empty, but at the same time, it has a luminous clarity, a knowing quality. That's the whole point. We know. We are aware. Normally, we are not aware of being aware, but we are aware. That's the fundamental nature of the mind, is that we know. We hear, we see, we think. But you can't grasp that as some entity, that knowing quality. Therefore, it's described as being shunyata, as being empty. So anyway, here what we are trying to do is the second level, which is to know the mind as it goes through without being always swept along by it, immersed in it. So during, as I say, during formal sitting, we don't judge the thoughts, we don't discriminate the thoughts, we just recognize thoughts as thoughts. But during the day, we can be more discriminating, and when negative thinking comes up, like anger, irritation, annoyance, or greed and grasping, or jealousy, or competition, or pride, or based on our fundamental ignorance, when that arises, we can recognize it because we are watching what's going on in the mind and recognizing that this is negative thinking. Then we can work to transform them into positive thoughts. At the same time, when positive thoughts come up, like spontaneously we feel empathy with others, or compassion, or kindness, or generosity, or any of the good qualities of the heart arise, then we also recognize those and encourage them more. Like in a garden, if we think of the heart as like a garden, then the good gardener has to pull out the weeds, but at the same time, they also have to water and fertilize the good plants. It's not just a matter of pulling out weeds. We don't have gardens just full of weeds. We have gardens which have good plants too. And those good plants need to be cultivated and encouraged to grow more and more, even as we are careful to make sure that the weeds do not flourish. So in that way, we need to know what's going on in our garden. And the way to know what's going on in your garden is to look at it. And so this ability to observe the mind is very, very important, to know what's going on inside. Because what we think influences everything, including what we say and what we do. We cannot just say and do without having a prior intention. The Buddha said that karma, meaning our actions of body, speech, and mind, is intention. So it's not just what we do, but why we do it. What's the underlying motivation? And in order to understand that, we have to be aware of what's going on inside us. What are we thinking? Where does the mind habitually dwell? Because also that will influence it at the time when we die. Because what we are going to meet after death is what the kind of level that we habitually have cultivated during life. And so therefore we have to be very careful. Where does our mind, what kind of thoughts are we usually thinking? Are they negative? Are they positive? Are they helpful? Are they detrimental? Do we spend much of our time upset with everybody else, annoyed, or repenting, or angry of things people did many, many years ago? We still haven't let it go. Oh, what are we thinking? Are we always worried? Are we always concerned? Are we always thinking me, me, me? Or are we more concerned with the happiness of others? And so forth. Let's look at our mind with friendly curiosity. What's going on in there? When things happen to us, how do we naturally respond? Until we know what's really going on, we can't start to tame the mind and train it. Training the mind means to help the mind to stop being so negative and start being more positive. But we can't do that if we haven't understood what's going on in our mind and where we normally are stuck. So therefore, the best teaching he can give, the oral instruction, is to observe the mind at all times. If you can't manage all times, which nobody can if they've never done it. When I first was with our yogis, we have these monks who have been trained to be yogis. They've been in retreat for 15, 20 years. And they said to me that to make a commitment that on every hour to observe the mind 3 times. It doesn't take long. It's just a matter of looking in this moment, what's going on in there? What am I thinking, actually? Not what should I be thinking, but what am I thinking right this minute? What thoughts actually are going on in there? And if they are, as I say, negative thoughts, then do something about that. If they are positive thoughts, fine, carry on. So the idea is that if we make a commitment, like 3 times every hour, just a few seconds, it doesn't take, it's not time. People always say, I have no time to practice. That's nonsense. As long as we breathe, we can practice. It's not a matter of time, it's a matter of cultivating the awareness, waking up. So then if we really put the commitment to look at the mind 3 times an hour, then what would happen is that the mind gradually becomes habituated. Our minds are habituated to be distracted. We have very strong habits of distraction. And therefore, to train the mind to be more conscious, to be more aware, to be more present, takes exactly that. It takes training. Buddhism's always talking about practice because it's like learning any skill. If you want to learn to play a sport, cricket or golf, or if you want to learn to play a musical instrument or anything, how much we have to do it again and again and again and again until gradually it becomes spontaneous, it becomes natural. But nobody can sit down and just immediately master a skill. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes repetition. Like our flautist out there. It probably took him years to become a competent flautist. And that's just to play a float. What to speak of dealing with the mind. So, this is why they said start 3 times every hour. Anybody can do that. The problem is not doing it, the problem is remembering to do it. We forget because we're not used to it. But what happens is that if we do try our best to do that, then gradually the mind gains the habit. And then spontaneously, it will suddenly, especially in a challenging situation, snap into awareness. And when we are present and aware, we're much less likely to slip into automatic, unthinking responses and reactions, especially to difficult situations. We are present. We're not just carried along by our habitual distracted mind. So gradually they learn to become more and more conscious for longer and longer times, becomes easier and easier, until finally one observes the mind at all times, naturally. I mean, in the yogis, of course, try to maintain awareness at all times, also during sleep and during the times of deep sleep, which is the big challenge. But anyway, for the rest of us, at least if we can try as much as possible during the day, while we're talking, while we're walking, while we're working, just suddenly be present. Okay? This is very important. I mean, if anybody wants to really practice becoming the masters of the mind instead of the slaves of our mind, the only way is to observe the mind. It doesn't make the mind tight, but the mind, if it knows it's being watched, will be much more careful, like a child. If it knows mummy's looking at it, it won't get up to mischief. as much. If it doesn't think anybody's watching, it can do anything. But when it's being watched, then it will, right, must sit nicely. So the mind is like that. If it knows it's being observed, we'll be more careful. We don't have to force it. Just naturally we do it. And it will calm down. And it will become much more orderly and much more friendly. Everything depends on the mind. We think the problem is out there. The government, the world situation, our neighbors, our family, everything out there, someone else. But in the end, the cause of our happiness or suffering is within our own hearts, not out there. So, really try to make an aspiration to watch the mind as much as you possibly can. Just kindly, with a nice, it's not Big Brother. Just watch what's happening with a kind of curiosity also. What's our mind up to now? The naughty monkey mind. Where's it running to? The supreme remedy is to know that nothing has any self-nature. So again, it's back to this idea that we solidify everything, that we reify everything, meaning that we make things into things. And then when we have solidified and made everything into a thing, unchanging, solid, immutable from its own side, then we, at the same time, cultivate our attitude towards that thing. We like it, we don't like it, we want it, we don't want it. And so all of our aggression, our anger and dislike and so forth, and all our greed and grasping and clinging is due to the fact that we assume that everything out there is just how we perceive it to be. Solid, real, unchanging. People, things. And because these things are immutable, unchanging, solid, we cultivate our attitude either of aversion or of clinging. And so we suffer. We suffer because things are not how they appear to be. As we said earlier, one thing is that we assume everything to be static and unchanging, and in fact everything is impermanent and changing moment to moment to moment, including people and possessions and status and health and reputation. Everything is changing. And secondly, the things, articles and things which we assume to be exactly how we see them to be, as something very solid and self-existent from their own side, are not that. They do not actually exist in the way that we assume them to exist by this projection from our mind. As I said this morning, we dealt with it somewhat. Nowadays, even neuroscientists and scientists are recognizing that things are not what they seem to be. That the old style physics and the old style ideas that we had don't really pertain to the way things really are. And especially neuroscience has become very fascinated by the fact that we cannot actually perceive anything on the outside except through the total projections which we ourselves are manufacturing from our brain center. That what we see, for example, is something so rough. The actual data which the eyes pick up is something just sort of blur of colors and shape, and is then immediately interpreted by our brain into being what it is, given a name, given a label, given also our own ideas and judgments and so forth about what that thing is and how we ourselves are going to relate to that thing. But it's not anything to do with the thing itself, which is, as I say, the actual image which we're picking up with our sense organs, like our eyes, is a very rough vision of what is then so clear and clarified by our mental apparatus. We don't see that. We think it's all exactly how we see things out there. But things are not the way we see things out there. We are making it up the whole time. Now, Indian philosophy has, for at least 2 or 3 millennia, known that, because great yogis have realized that for themselves. But up to now, it was regarded as being the fantasies of the Indian mind. It likes to have all these fancy ideas. It's not rational like good old Western philosophy. But now, of course, we have moved into a whole new epoch where both quantum physics and neuroscience have discovered, hey, guess what? Yeah, that's true. It's all just like that. I mean, there's a famous dialogue where one quantum physicist said to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but I don't understand how you could know that without our machines. And His Holiness said, well, we don't understand how you could know that without meditating. But they come to the same point. And it's very interesting how, this is why His Holiness is encouraging so many monks and nuns, etc., to learn something about science, because not the ordinary kind of science, but this new epoch in going beyond traditional science to this whole other realm of being, which up to very, very recently was sealed off from our ordinary cogitations. I mean, it's fascinating how much it compares with the Buddhist view and later with the Vedantic view. Because, actually things are not the way they seem to be. They do not have a solid core, unchanging identity from their own side. And at the same time, things are much more interdependent. Nothing can exist from its own side independently. Everything depends on everything, depends on everything, depends on everything. It's all so incredibly, ultimately interconnected. And our dualistic thinking doesn't see that. Our dualistic thinking naturally separates everything and objectifies it into things out there disconnected from the observer. But this is what they're discovering, that actually everything is connected with that which observes and does not exist from its own side, except insofar as it is intuited and observed by, there's this interplay between the two, which previously people hadn't recognized. They thought, I close my eyes, I cease to exist, everything out there carries on. But it's not, it doesn't. Because each one of us is creating our own universe, moment to moment. But we cannot realize that with our dualistic mindset. We only can recognize that in a state of primordial awareness, which is by its very nature non-dualistic. So there's no I there to make the opposition of other. That's why it's considered to be, as I said before, awakening. Right? It's Bodhi. When we wake up, we recognize that we have been creating this whole movie. It doesn't mean that things disappear. It's not that. But things are seen in a very different way. And the interconnection between everything is seen in a very different way, including the interconnection with nature, which is why nowadays, with this rise in ecology and environmental awareness, this is very much substantiated by the new understanding of how the mind is interconnected with everything, and is that we depend on everything around us just as everything around us depends on us. That subject-object dichotomy is blown away, so that we are the trees, only we just don't see that. So this is a very important understanding that things are not the way we think they are. That it's okay on a relative level. Conventionally, we manage perfectly okay, except we're destroying the planet. But apart from that, we're managing. But we don't know how things really are. And so the whole point is to get some insight into a deep level of interconnection with everything, not just humans, but with all the animals, birds, insects, and with nature, all the plant, everything which has intelligence. And plants also have great intelligence, otherwise they couldn't function. They're very intelligent. They have their own kind of intelligence, but the whole universe is intelligent. Otherwise it couldn't function. Every little cell is so intelligent. It's extraordinary. Unbelievable. I mean, if you want to blow your mind, read about cosmology and about cellular, that level. Very, very, very small and very, very vast. Then you see how small, small, small our minds are. My goodness, we are so blocked. We're living in little tiny boxes. The world is an extraordinary place, but it all starts from the mind. Okay. So nothing exists independently from its own side, and not independence and interdependence with everything else. So this is what it means when it says no self-nature. Nothing from its own side is independent. Everything is interdependent. I mean, what to speak of our human beings, but every tree, every flower depends on so many different causes and conditions: the earth, the soil, the water, the air, the sun, other plants around it, the bees, the insects. And each one of them also is dependent on other factors. So everything is independently holding together. So if you remove one element, this is why, again, we destroy the planet, because we keep being so clever and introducing things which shouldn't be there, or taking away things which really should be there, and as a result, destroying the balance and essentially messing everything up. We're very good at messing everything up because we're so clever. And so, as Einstein said, the modern world is greatly increased in knowledge, but there has been no corresponding increase in wisdom. And this is very true. We're very clever and really very stupid at the same time, which is why we're destroying ourselves. Anyway, so this is the sad fact of the matter. So he said the supreme conduct, actions, is to be in disharmony with the rest of the world. So many people have come and said, oh, I think there's a misprint here. He means, of course, to be in harmony with the world. But he didn't mean to be in harmony with the world. He meant exactly what he said. So the supreme way of acting, the supreme conduct, is to not be in harmony with the world. What does that mean? The world is based on cultivating comfort, ego desires, overcoming your enemies and placating your friends, and in general, the values of the world are extremely self-centered and not in any way considered to be of any genuine benefit to anyone outside of a very small circle. They lack compassion, they lack kindness, they lack genuine generosity, and in general, most people are concerned with getting on, getting more money, getting big status, getting nowadays bigger houses, bigger cars, and generally just trying to make samsara as comfortable as possible. But samsara, by its nature, is suffering. So no matter what we try to do, in the end it doesn't work. However much we try to pad it, we are in prison. We might be in the penthouse suite here, but it's still prison. So, the highest conduct is not to be in harmony with the world, meaning not that we fight with all our neighbors or our work colleagues and our family. It doesn't mean that, of course. I mean, harmony within the community was greatly praised by the Buddha. But it means to be in disharmony with the values of the world, which says that what counts is how much money we get, how much status we have, how much of the worldly dharmas we manage to cultivate. That's not what is going to make us happy. It's certainly not what is going to liberate us. So therefore, he says that the highest conduct, the real way to live in the world, is to be in disharmony with the values. That what we consider to be important is inner cultivation and not simply outer accumulation. Because no matter what we have in the form of houses and cars and possessions and status and reputation and all of these things, at the time of death, we leave it all behind. We take nothing with us. We go empty-handed and naked, apart from our consciousness, which still flows, and our karma. All the weight of our actions of body, speech, and mind, which we have accumulated, that goes with us. But many people don't care about how they act or how that affects the people around them. They're only interested in the outer manifestations of getting more money, making more profits, being admired by all your contemporaries because you're more beautiful or you're more fashionable or you're more famous or you're more this, you're more that, and everybody thinks, wow, that's so and so. It's so childish. And yet that is what is promoted in society, right? Society, you read any papers, especially those directed for women, oh God, it's all about how you look and what you wear. Who cares? And men's papers all about, finance and business and how to overcome your enemies and your competitors. And all that you've got to take with you as your karma into next lifetime. That's the real acquisition. Not bigger houses and more cars, but your karma that got you those bigger houses and more cars. That you can't leave behind. So therefore, we should live our lives impeccably, seeing that we cause no harm to ourselves or to others. That we live with a kind of lifestyle which brings benefit. He said up here about altruism, means to benefit others. How can I live my life so that others are benefited? Not just close family, but everyone who comes in contact. This is the point. And all of us, this is about our life. This is not some high Buddhist philosophy. This is about how are we living our lives? How did we live our lives? Because that's what we're taking with us, not all the other stuff. That we leave behind. What goes with us are our actions of body, speech and mind, and especially mind. Where is our mind dwelling? This is the point. So society tells us one thing, and anybody who has any sense at all is trying to walk in a different direction. This is what he means by being in disharmony with the world, not with the world's values, but with spiritual values. All the religions have understood that spiritual values often are in the face of society's values. Jesus said, give you no thought to what you can, where you're going to live, or how you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. That's not important. Have faith. Hinduism has always had a tradition of renunciation. Outer renunciation, inner renunciation. Islam likewise, especially with the Sufi tradition. Always there's the understanding that there is something so much more that we are blocking off by our pursuit of external accomplishments and success. It's not that you all have to become monks and nuns. It's not to do with that. It's to do with inner change of direction. Recognizing what is really important, what will give us happiness and what will not give us happiness. Because society is not a good model, is not a good guide. They tell us a lot of lies. And for some people it takes a long time before they recognize that they've been lied to all their lives. And that what they were told was so important is really nothing important at all. And things which were told, not mentioned, are what really matter in life. So, live your life being in disharmony with society. Doesn't mean being, unfriendly. But it means having different values. Really thinking, what is meaningful? What can I have this precious human life, and all of you are well educated and affluent enough to be here. So, what are we doing with our lives? We have this incredible opportunity, which is denied to most of the world. What is one doing with it? Just wasting it yet again? Or actually using it for some real meaningful activity? Because it's all up to us. Doesn't matter how old or how young we are. We should evaluate our values and decide what is meaningful and what is just a waste of time and energy that could be put to better use. Isn't it? So this is why he says to be in disharmony. It doesn't mean to fight with everybody. It means that we see things in a different way to how we're fed with the media. You know, the media is crazy. I mean, I hope you realize that. And 99% of what it gives you is junk, which just fills the mind full of more junk, as if we didn't have enough. It's like we have a big trash heap of all the stupid things which are told to us and blared out to us day by day by day. I mean, completely waste of time. And often not even true. Very rarely really true. Definitely very rarely meaningful. So we should be discriminating. Otherwise, you know, we're just wasting our lives just again for what? So, be in disharmony. Be in disharmony with society in the sense that we look and have really more genuine values, that we recognize we have this very precious human life and we should do something really meaningful with it and not just waste it now. And that has nothing to do, as I say, with your age or your circumstances. It has to do with changing the attitude of the mind. The supreme accomplishment is the continuous decrease of disturbing emotions. So this is again a very, I like the way Atisha takes things and twists them around. The word which is here translated as accomplishment is the word in Sanskrit siddhi. And therefore, as most of the audience here is Indian, you will understand the idea of siddhi is of often in people's minds of magical powers. And in Atisha's time especially, it was the time of what is called the Mahasiddhas. And a lot of a practitioner's accomplishment was reckoned on how many siddhis they could display. For example, shortly after Atisha, there came Milarepa, who was the great yogi of Tibet. And one of the many siddhis displayed by Milarepa was that he could fly. And so many yogis were flying around in those days, or walking on water and doing all sorts of extraordinary things. And this is what gave them credence. You know, people loved them not because of their great wisdom, but because they could fly. And so in those days, as now also, of course, we know that many gurus attain their status because they have powers. They have siddhi, right? And so if you're a siddha, it is regarded that you're someone very special and very spiritual. The Buddha at his time, actually in the monastic rules, monks are forbidden to show any siddhis, because he understood very clearly that just because you have certain powers, and you might have powers, it's not that that's not true, but so what? It is not of itself an indication of any spiritual progress. Now, it might be that you are very spiritually advanced and also have siddhis, but you might be very spiritually advanced and have no siddhis. Or you might have many siddhis, but not really be spiritually advanced. So siddhis and spirituality don't necessarily go together. They can, but they don't need to. And so therefore, again, Atisha is saying, That's not, being able to fly or, produce gold rings out of your palm of your hands, etc. That's no indication of your spiritual level. What really shows that we have spiritual maturity and understanding is the continuous decrease of our disturbing emotions. Disturbing emotions means anger, greed, pride, jealousy, and so forth. All those negative emotions which disturb the mind, the klesha. If you want a real sign that your meditation is going well, are your klesha, your afflictive emotions, decreasing or not? Somewhere else, Atisha says that if you have been in retreat, meditation retreat, maybe for a year or more, the question to ask when you come out is not what incredible bliss and clarity and visions and all sorts of things, manifested during that time. The question is, he says, have your afflictive emotions, your kleshas, decreased, increased, or stayed the same? Increased, we're more irritable with people's behavior, or we're spending our time dreaming of ice cream or chocolate, and so we're more greedy than ever, or we're more proud, or anything like this. If that's happened, then it was a waste of time. The only sign of success is that we are less angry, less greedy and attached, less proud, less jealous, more quiet, more calm, more kind, more compassionate, naturally. Then we can say, yeah, it's starting to work. Yeah, okay, good. Keep going. But anything else, clairvoyance, we know what's going to be happening next week, or we even having, insight into past lives, or being able to see through walls, or any of that sort of thing, in itself is no indication of spirituality. Some people naturally have these powers. Doesn't mean they're better people. I mean, I have known psychics who are extremely psychic, quite extraordinary. I mean, you would come, they had a hard time with it because everybody they see, they would immediately know everything about them. And they didn't want to. Who needs it? We have a hard enough time with ourselves. What to speak dealing with everybody else's hang-ups. And so they were trying to block it so they wouldn't be so open to seeing. But in themselves, they were completely screwed up. I mean, they really hopeless. I mean, and they had many, many gifts, psychic gifts, but it didn't mean that they were more spiritual or more advanced or more wise. And so Atisha is completely right here. That is not an indication. The best signs of success or of accomplishment, siddhi, are that our minds become more clear, more pure, less in the grip of negative emotions, more open to positive emotions. Then we can feel, yes, something inside is transforming. Because we've tamed the mind, we are learning to train the mind. Now the mind is transforming. Transforming when somebody annoys us, we don't get angry, we just, okay, no problem. Naturally. Then you can feel, yeah, something inside is changing. And that's good. Good. Keep going. Do you understand? It's very, very important because, sometimes, we get caught up in charisma. All these big gurus are charismatic. And so we think charisma also is a sign of advanced spirituality. Hitler was very charismatic. Probably Mao was very charismatic. That's why they could lead people. So don't be taken in by charisma. His Holiness always says that we should, well, I mean, it's not easy, but he says that, first of all, in the Tantras it says one should not accept a guru until one has really thoroughly examined them, even up to 12 years. In other words, just because he's sort of has a huge following and everybody loves him, like a pop star, like a Bollywood actor, doesn't mean that therefore he is a reliable person to follow. And so His Holiness says we should try to spy on the guru. In other words, not how they appear when they're sitting up on their high throne, being a guru. But how are they behind the scenes? And this is where it gets difficult because you can't find how they are behind the scenes. But if you know somebody who knows somebody, then you could find out how are they behind the scenes? How do they treat ordinary people? How do they treat people who have no benefit whatsoever, not just big donors, but ordinary people? How do they treat their assistants? How do they treat just, how are they when they're not sitting up on their high thrones being gurus? Because that's what counts. Somebody asked His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who was a teacher himself, he asked the Dalai Lama, how do you deal with the discrepancy, the distinction when you're up there in your role as a teacher and then how you are, in everyday life behind the scenes? And His Holiness looked puzzled. And so he explained again, well, when you're a teacher and you're putting on your show, and then, the rest of the time when you're back with your family and so forth, how do you deal with that gap? And His Holiness said, if you are any different when you are up on your teaching seat and behind the scenes, if there's any difference, then you should not be on that teaching seat. And I would say for His Holiness that's true. He is who he is, whether he's up on a high throne or behind the scenes with his attendants. He's just the same. And that's what makes him genuine. Not displaying lots of charismatic powers, but just because he's who he is, and you can see he's genuine. So this is the point for all of us, that we should be genuine. And when we practice and try to incorporate Dharma into our daily life, the real test is how we are in trying situations, which would normally arouse our anger and aversion or our greed and or jealousy or whatever. In those times, how are we naturally responding? And that is an indication of whether or not these teachings actually percolate from the brain down into the heart and transform us or not. Because intellectually we know all the answers. But whether or not that then percolates into our daily life and our daily responses, that's why we need to practice, so that it becomes natural. And in the meantime, even if it's not natural, we can try. So therefore, the supreme sign of accomplishment is the continuous decrease of our wishes and wants. So the point is that we are endlessly wanting. The Buddha said that the cause of our dissatisfaction, the cause of our dukkha, is clinging. He didn't say the cause of our dukkha is anger or jealousy or the difficult social situation in which we're living or the government and the prime ministers and presidents. No, the cause of our suffering is our grasping mind, our attachment. And he also said that greed is like salty water, and the more you drink, the more thirsty we become. We never are satisfied by drinking salty water. He said another place that we could drink the whole ocean and we would still be thirsty. And this has been proved, of course, in our modern day, where now people are affluent to a degree which has never been known in the world before, as far as our comfort level is concerned. And yet, are people satisfied? Content? Happy? Grateful? Appreciative? No way. They just want more, and bigger, and better, and more expensive. And everything now is like, I mean, when I was young, which is not endlessly long ago, I mean, we wasn't exactly Queen Victoria. People and things were built to last. You bought a radio or you bought a telephone, you expected it to last for years and years and years. And it was built to last for years and years and years. And it did last for years and years and years. Now, as we all know, everything you buy, next thing you know, they've got out a new model, and you can't use your old model because all the things don't connect with it anymore. So you have to throw that away and buy a new one. And then within a few months, you're again upmarketed. All the time my computer's telling me, oh, you have to update, we have new whatevers. I don't want them. You have no choice. And so our wishes and wants become increasingly more, faster. Everything is increasing. And I mean, not to keep on about this, but this is why we are destroying ourselves, because we don't, to produce all that. And then all the things you throw away, what do you do with them? They're highly poisonous. We just throw them out and close your eyes, but where are they being, what you're doing with them once they're gone? Anyway, I'm not getting into an ecological debate here, but the fact is that it is proved now. I mean, this was said in the 11th century when people really didn't have much. But now, if Atisha was here, he would be gobsmacked at the level that people are living. And yet people still want more and more and more and more and more. Never ceases. And everybody wants now. I mean, children this big, the things that they want. We were just discussing the other day how when we were young, we were told, you ate what was put on the table. That was it. You weren't asked what you wanted to eat. When you're, 2 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old. I mean, you got what you were given. Grateful. Nowadays, would you like this, dear, or would you like that, or would you prefer something else? When they're 2 years old, just shove it in them. And clothing, what do you want to wear? Just put them in something, what the hell? But the thing is, we're all being trained to want. And especially to want what we don't have. Instead of accepting what we have and being grateful for it, we're being trained to be fussy and choosy and keep wanting new things. What somebody else has, I want one of those. I don't want my wardrobe full of clothes. I don't want that because I saw her wearing that and I want one of those. So this is how we're being trained now, because, the producers want us to buy, especially to buy all these things which are actually completely useless. I mean, the more useless they are, the more they promote them, that our lives are not worth living without them. And we believe it. I mean, especially young people. And so they're endlessly dissatisfied. Because if you're dissatisfied, then you will seek for more and more on the outside to fill up that big black hole inside. So therefore, he says that the supreme sign of accomplishment, how we know, is that the continuous decrease of our wishes and wants, at the end of the day, who needs it? And when we feel that inside, that really and truly, honestly, we have so much already, and isn't it incredible? And that sense of inner contentment that we have so much, what more do we need? Then he says, that is a sign that we are beginning to understand. We are beginning to transform the mind. That's the accomplishment, to transform the mind from being greedy and grasping and attached to opening up and rejoicing in giving and sharing rather than in getting and accumulating. A joy in giving rather than endlessly getting more. I need this, I need that. So this, he says, just to be content, to appreciate, be open, and know that what already we have is more than enough. Then the mind can relax. And we don't have to grasp. It's the grasping, as the Buddha said, which causes suffering. If we hold things gently and lightly and caringly, then we can allow things to flow. But if we try to hold on to things tightly because we think if we don't hold tightly, we'll lose them, then we've already killed the spirit. Somebody said it's like holding a little baby chicken, a one-day-old chicken, a little baby chick. Then you have to hold it very, very carefully. But if we think, oh, this is a beautiful chicken, I want it to be with my chicken forever, I mustn't let it go, no chicken. So with our relationships also, to hold them gently, with love, but with openness, allowing them to be. While they're with us, they're with us. When they leave, and not trying to hold on. It's the holding on which is the suffering, not the loss, actually. Because in the loss we appreciate everything is impermanent, everything comes together and departs. Okay, so are there any questions? Okay, so we'll deal with this one first. She's asking questions which I'm sure many of you have also thought of. Okay. Bodhicitta says we have to take along others in our paths and show compassion. But monks and saints who attain nirvana live in solitary retreat. So how do they attain nirvana when they are all by themselves and their ego? Well, one thing is that as at the time of Milarepa, he was a great yogi of the 11th, 12th century. And he lived up in caves all his adult life. And so he had many, many students. And one day, one of his students said to him, look, you know, we are here to serve all sentient beings, but meantime, we're just stuck up in these caves meditating. So isn't this selfish? And shouldn't we go off and, you know, benefit sentient beings? And Milarepa said that as long as the skies exist, so long there will be sentient beings to be saved. First of all, save yourself. In other words, if, for example, one saw all the sickness in the world and said, I have got to go out and help these people because there's so much sickness. And people said, well, good, very good, but first you have to go away for many years into medical college and study. And one said, no, that's terribly selfish because all these people are suffering. I can't spend my time just studying away in college. I've got to go out and help. And so one grabs a bag of medicines and maybe a scalpel, you know, a knife, a surgeon's knife, and rushes out with terribly good intention to benefit everybody. But because oneself is ignorant, one ends up with the best intentions, giving all the wrong medicines, and who knows what you're doing with the scalpel. Good intentions, but more wisdom to go away, study, to be a good doctor. Then, with that skill and knowledge, there are still lots of people out there sick. It's not going to run out of sick people. Right? So, then you can genuinely benefit because we have the knowledge and the skills to really be of benefit to others. So likewise with this what Milarepa was saying, there are always going to be people out there who need help. So in the meantime, gain the wisdom and the understanding to be able, not just in this lifetime, but in all our future lifetimes, to be of benefit for others. Otherwise, it's the blind leading the blind. Good intentions, but no wisdom. Do you understand? So those people who are in, you know, in their caves and in their retreats, looks like they're being very selfish, but actually what they're doing is to learn to graduate in the school of spiritual knowledge so that they can, not just in the latter part of this life, but in all future lifetimes, always come back again and again with the necessary skills and understanding to be able to benefit others. So this is why in all the spiritual traditions, also in Christianity, they have, in the Catholic school, they have these contemplative nuns who do nothing but pray. But how wonderful for the world that there's someone praying for it. Because, you know, if they weren't praying, who knows what would happen to the world? What we do to benefit others is not necessarily something which we can see, which we can quantify with our you know, our senses and our machines. It might be something quite, you know, when they're in retreat, they're also sending out universal loving kindness and compassion to all beings. They're not just thinking me, me, me. It's not the ego. The ego starts the retreat, but if it's a genuine transformation, then what comes out from that retreat is something very different. Everybody goes into retreat with an ego. It's the ego saying, I want to be enlightened. But of course, you know, that's where you start. We start where we are. We start with our egos. But if the ego has, you know, the aspiration to tame itself and train and transcend, then it's no longer the ego that comes out the other end. But that takes time. In our monastery, we have, and also in our nunnery, we have trainee nuns who are now been in 10-year retreat. But in the monastery, which we're affiliated with, there are yogis, monks who have been practicing, well, some of them for 50 or more years. And all of them have to be in for at least 15, 20 years before they're considered to be, that their realization has stabilized. It's not enough just to realize the nature of the mind, but to stabilize that realization so that wherever we are, it doesn't decrease. So I compare that to like baking a cake. You get the mixture, you put it into a hot oven, you close the door, the mixture rises, and if we think, oh, now it's cooked, look, it's risen, we take it out the oven, because it's only half baked, it will collapse and be extremely gooey and disgusting. And this is what happens with many so-called teachers. They get some experience, some genuine realization, but they think they're enlightened. They think they're fully cooked, but they're not fully cooked. They're only half baked. And so they collapse, become very greedy, or get up to all sorts of things they shouldn't be getting up to, because everybody assumes they're enlightened because they think they're enlightened, and they cause more harm than good. But if you keep that cake mixture, when it's risen, in the oven, don't take it out, then at the end it is fully cooked all the way through. Then you take it out the oven, it will keep its shape, and it will be very nourishing and delicious. But we have to wait till it's fully cooked. Do you understand? So this is the point. This is why people go into very long retreats, and they stay in retreats until they're fully cooked. Once they're fully cooked, then they can be anywhere. And they will be of great benefit to many, many beings. But we should not wait for, kind of premature. The minute we get some kind of experience, we think, oh, right, that's it. Now I'm enlightened. I'm the world's great guru. I'm going to save everybody. And it's just the ego inflated. And ego inflated, luminous, glowing, can easily be mistaken for actual accomplishment, which it isn't. It's the opposite, and can become very demonic if one's not careful. So that's why not just this lifetime, but endless lifetimes, endless beings to be saved, first get oneself together so that it's solid and genuine and unshakable. Then, throughout time and space, one can benefit many, 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 many beings. Okay? While meditating or even in silence, I hear a ringing sound. Should I focus on this or ignore it? Now, that's a very interesting question also. There is, especially in certain Hindu schools, a practice of focusing on what's called nada. Nada is this inner sound, which usually is experienced as a ringing sound. So I assume this is what you're hearing. There is nothing wrong with focusing on that, if one wishes to. One can use that as an object of meditation. As I say, in a number of, I think in Narada Swami, they focus on the nada. Some big schools, maybe Brahma Kumaris, somebody. Anyway, there are certain very prominent Hindu schools which focus on the nada. It's not in itself a Buddhist practice, but there is an interesting passage, and a very prominent American monk called Ajahn Sumedho, who was a disciple of Ajahn Chah, the great Thai forest teacher, And Ajahn Sumedho himself is, considered to be an immaculate teacher. He's very, very good teacher. He promotes concentration on this inner sound, which is like a ringing sound. And he said he found that very helpful for helping his awareness. There is a passage in the Mahayana Sutra, Surangama Sutra, I think, in which the Buddha interrogates all the bodhisattvas to find what avenue of practice they did to attain enlightenment. And so all the different bodhisattvas stand up, one concentrated on sight, one on breath, one on this, one on that. They're all discussing their various doorways into realization. And Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, says he concentrated on the inner sound, which presumably is this nada. And the Buddha compliments him as having the best way. And so, since many Chinese study this sutra, they are very puzzled because there's nothing actually in Buddhism talking about this inner sound. And so then when Ajahn Sumedho, this American monk, started talking about the nada, they said, oh, that must be what Avalokiteshvara was talking about, which they couldn't decide what that was about, because the Buddha said that was the best way. That was why they were puzzled. The best way, but nobody's ever heard of it. And so if one is particularly in contact with this inner sound, I think it's a valid way for attaining to shamatha, to attaining to this calm abiding meditation, which is the first level of meditation, and a way of connecting during the day also, when we get very distracted, to bring ourselves back to that inner sound. I mean, it's nothing mystical. It's just there is this sound inside, and we can attune to it. So it's a support for awareness. And so rather than the breath, I mean, if one has the affinity, one could use that instead. There's nothing against it, I don't think. So if one naturally hears that, then use it as a focus for attaining shamatha. Let us say that someone did wrong to me and I am angry with him, but he does not have an independent nature, so who am I angry with? Well, that's a good question. Ultimately, obviously, if you have ultimate understanding that he has no true nature, then you wouldn't be angry. But because one is angry, then one only intellectually understands that he has no ultimate nature. And nonetheless, on a relative level, one is still angry. One would not be angry with someone if one really understood that we have no ultimate nature, they have no ultimate nature. So, I would say, if that helps you to contemplate the fact that he really has no ultimate nature, so what the hell am I worrying about? And that dissolves your anger, then wonderful. That's a realization of emptiness. But if, having intellectually worked that one out, one is still angry, then I think you have a little bit of work to do still. And for anger, it's very useful just to look at the anger. Don't worry about who it's directed at, whether they have ultimately no nature or so on. It's not the point. The point is there's a feeling of anger. So to allow that feeling of anger to arise and just look at it. What does it feel like? Where is the anger? Is it in some part of the body? One feels tense, or the heart hurts, or something. How does it feel? Forget the object. how does it feel? What is the anger? How is it? You can also ask, well, who is angry? Where is this feeling, I am angry? Because this also shows the ego very nakedly. But with any negative emotion, it's very important to embrace that emotion, not to reject it or try to suppress it or disapprove of it or feel angry at being angry, but to allow the emotion to come up, welcome it like a friend, and just say, what's your problem? Because our emotions, our negative emotions, often we don't want to hear them. We deny them, we throw them, try to get rid of them. But in the end, they are telling us something and we need to hear them, and that's where they transform. There is a story, I think it's in Milarepa, but it's in somewhere, where he returns to his cave. And in his cave are sitting these 3 or 5 demons. These bad spirits. And they all glower at him. So he says, right. So he says some fierce mantras to destroy them. And they'll just not in the least bit impressed with his fierce mantras. So he says, okay, right. So they sit down. Emptiness. Emptiness. They're all just empty projections of the mind. Oh, that didn't work. Okay. So then he says, okay, welcome, you are my guests. Please just sit there. I will make us all a nice cup of tea. Just sit there. You're my guests here. So then he turns and he starts making tea. He lights the fire, puts on the pot, pours the water, throws in some tea leaves. And when he turns around, all those fierce demons have turned into peaceful, beautiful local deities who say, we will follow you now and we will protect the Dharma. Because he accepted them. So this really, I'm sure, is just an example of, there are negative emotions. When we try to destroy them or we try to negate them, they just laugh at us. But if we accept them and welcome them, then they transform of themselves. We don't have to do anything. They transform. In the Vajrayana, in Tantra, it's always understood that our negative emotions at their root are very positive wisdom energy, which has got distorted. So in themselves, our negative energies are not necessarily bad. They are a power within us, which has just got perverted. But at the source, it's very positive, strong wisdom energy. Therefore, we don't need to destroy that energy. What we need is to transform that energy. It's said that it's better to be a tiger than to be a rabbit. In other words, tigers in their unleashed state are dangerous, but if they have that power, which a rabbit doesn't have, so on a spiritual path, it's actually better to have strong emotions, which then can be transformed, rather than to be very, very placid by temperament when it doesn't have that power to break through. So if we have very strong emotional issues, we shouldn't think that that's an obstacle to enlightenment. If we are skillful, they can be the cause of enlightenment. But we have to be skillful. Doesn't mean just letting us, giving in to all our negative emotions. It means working with the negative emotions in order to understand them and then transform them. They will transform themselves. We don't have to do anything. So I wouldn't worry with this philosophical idea of something, your person that is making you upset. They're not the important thing. The important thing is our reaction of anger to someone who upsets us. That's the important, that's what we've got to work on. And how is that feeling, what is it, why when somebody does something to us, says something to us, we get all worked up and upset and angry because somebody did something bad to us? Then the important thing is that feeling that we have. And then to be able to really look at it and see it and accept it and really listen to what it's saying and the energy it's giving us, and allow it to, of itself, turn into something quite other. It might not happen right away, but eventually it can happen. And in the meantime, if you can't manage that, at least you can visualize, even whether they've got self-nature or no self-nature, sending loving kindness and compassion to the other and to oneself. The problem and the solution is all within us. So from our side, all we have to do is to work skillfully with our own mind and not allow the ego and our defilements to become the masters of our mind. Because we live within the mind, we swim in the ocean of the mind, of our consciousness. So it's very important, therefore, that we, first of all, do not, the ego, which we all have until we're almost enlightened. So it's, however much we say there is no ego, of course we still, who is saying there is no ego is the ego. So, I mean, just saying there's no ego doesn't get rid of anything, but it gives us an idea. But the ego is going to walk the path to enlightenment, to the dissolution of the ego. So we need to have a healthy, well-balanced sense of self. The ego can be a good servant to take us along the path, but it's a terrible master because it's ignorant. It's ignorance personified. And it's totally in control, then we're in trouble. But if we use it, make use of it, then it's beneficial until its final dissolution through wisdom. So just as I say, beating up the ego doesn't solve the ego. You just end up with a battered ego and a sad ego, which is always thinking, poor me, poor me, poor me. But a healthy, strong sense of self, like a healthy, strong body, doesn't have to think about itself. It's only when we're sick that we're thinking about our body the whole time. If we're healthy, we're not having to think about it. The body works well, it functions. And so if the ego is strong and healthy, which the Buddha tried to create through this meditation on calm and meditation on loving kindness and compassion, to heal the sense of self, so we have a well-functioning sense of self, then that self is going to walk the path towards the dissolution of the self. But it has to be healthy. And we have to have the confidence to believe we can do it. Because, we all have the potential within us. We just have to realize that potential, that's all. And in the meantime, just to try to be a little better, a little kinder, a little nicer, a little less reactive. We can all do that. So is that all the questions we have? Oh, that's amazing. Have you really understood? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Turn it around,
Yes, of course. I think all genuine religious paths realize that what is standing in the way of our realizing of our true divine nature by whatever name is our identification with the small self. So in all genuine mystical traditions of any religion, it is understood that the main problem is our small self, which here we're calling the ego, I, Latin for I. Well, I mean, yes, we have to but as I'm saying, we can't get rid of the ego by saying, okay, ego, you're a bad one, I'm getting rid of you, so go away. Because who is saying that? That's the ego. So, I mean, it doesn't work like that. The ego, so I'm saying that we need to have a strong, healthy ego in order to walk the path towards the dissolution of the ego. The ego dissolves in face of the light of our wisdom. As we recognize, and from the Buddhist point of view, as we recognize the ultimate nature of our mind, of our consciousness, the unity of the open, spacious, empty clarity. The clarity meaning a kind of this very non-dual knowingness of the mind. And when there is that level of non-duality of the awareness of the mind, which we acquire through meditation, there's no ego. You don't have to throw it out, you don't have to bash it up. It dissolves. Then, of course, immediately, oh God, now I got it, yes, I understand, boom, back comes the ego, right? But gradually, which is fine, it's natural, the ego is going to claim. But gradually, as we work to have more and more glimpses of the true nature of the mind and begin to stabilize that more and more and more, then conversely, the sense of I-ness begins to weaken. It just begins to weaken. And I mean, when you're it's like the clouds are the ego. So as the clouds begin to dissolve further and further and not coming back so much further, when the sky is completely blue, one's a Buddha. And until then, one is still walking the path. So the ego takes a long time to dissolve. In the early schools, you only reached to complete dissolution of the ego when you became an arahat, when you realized nirvana. And in the Mahayana schools, on the 8th bodhisattva level, and there's only 10 levels, so you're pretty near the goal by that time. In the meantime, we can use the sense of self as a tool, to walk the way. I mean, we shouldn't make the ego into a demon. It's our sense of who we are. And therefore, on a relative level, it's okay. It's just on an ultimate level, it doesn't exist as we think it exists, as something solid and enduring and real and who I am. The problem is our identification with the ego. That we think this is who I am, and we don't recognize that our true nature is something so much more vast. That we think ourselves as something narrow and me, and who I am in this lifetime, not remembering that last time, if we had met, we wouldn't know ourselves at all. And next lifetime, who knows what we're going to be? We may have changed gender, changed nationality, might not even be humans anymore. We wouldn't recognize ourselves. So to play the role in this lifetime is fine, as long as we don't totally believe in it and recognize it's just a role we need to play.
Just one more question connected with this. When one attains, when one gets a glimpse, let's say, of enlightenment, you get that glimpse. So then that glimpse actually motivates you to
get more glimpses.
Right? It motivates you to go along that path, to rise higher and higher. And then you get more than a glimpse, I presume, I'm just asking, which lasts, and that the period of enlightenment or samadhi or nirvana, as you might call it. Maybe in the beginning you get a flicker of it, maybe a few seconds. Then perhaps you then you practice a little more and you get, maybe you're there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Does it then, I mean, you don't really stay there until you, I mean, a person may have attained samadhi and may have come back again into, somewhere halfway down, halfway down the ladder. How, is it true that you have to actually try to maintain that nirvana for days and years together and so on? Because, why I'm asking you that question is, apparently, I haven't read about it, but I've heard that Swami Ramakrishna, he attained samadhi 3 times following 3 different paths. I think first it was the Vedantism, then it was through, I think, Buddhism or Christianity, and then, a third one also. 3 different religions he practiced to attain it. So, which means that he got there, then he came down, back to scratch, then he went again, then he came down, and third time again. A little difficult for me to understand. I always thought that once you're there, then you're there.
Okay. Of course, from the point of view Ramakrishna, I'm not quite sure what he meant by samadhi, but of course, any of these higher states can be attained by any path. I mean, Buddhism, despite its own belief, does not have a copyright on ultimate reality. Ultimate reality is just ultimate reality, and how we realize it, different people have different paths. And so the names we give to ultimate reality change in accordance with the culture of that place, but they're just labels on space. I mean, they are not the actual experience, they are just the label that the conceptual mind then puts on that experience. So in Buddhism, it was always regarded that the initial glimpse, when the clouds part, even though they go back again, that was a very, very important turning point in our spiritual life. So in the Theravada system, the early Pali Canon, it was called entering the stream. Because once you entered the stream, then you were going to have to be flowing up the stream. So then you became a once returner, never returner, and then an arhat. In the Zen school of Japan, it's called Kensho. And so it's again this sense of, you just get it. And usually it's only for a short glimpse, and then it covers up again. But now we know that there's not just cloud, there really is sky. That really, this is my nature. I mean, so then it's enormously encouraging. Everything changes, because until then, it's just an intellectual belief. Yeah, all the books say so, all the lamas and all the gurus say so. It must be true, because why would they lie? But personally, I haven't got a clue. But yeah, I believe it. Now, it's not belief. We know. And my Lama said that once we have recognized the nature of the mind, this primordial pure awareness, then we can start to meditate. Because the genuine meditation then comes afterwards to, as you were saying, to elongate this period of being aware. It's a very simple. It's not samadhi in the sense it's not bliss. It's not anything exciting. I mean, it can be so plain. It's like space. The things in space are very beautiful, but space itself is a space. It's not, you don't get ecstatic, wow, what fantastic space, you know? And yet nothing could exist if it were not for that space. So it's like that. The mind, that the innate clarity, luminous clarity and open spacious emptiness of the mind is not actually very exciting. It's not bliss and peace and visions and ecstatic. That is called in Tibetan nyam. In Tibetan they have two things which is very helpful, I think. One is called nyam and one is called tokpa. Nyam means tokpa means a direct realization of the nature of the mind. Everything else is nyam. So when we're meditating, all the bliss, all the clarity, all the open spaciousness, all the shakings, all the kundalini, all of this, nyam. Very nice, nothing wrong, but it's not tokpa. And it's important to remember that, because people do get caught up in all these exciting bliss states and all these other things which happen. The mind feels like it's one with the universe and all this sort of thing. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not realization. And realization is something on a completely different level. It's a shift in consciousness from the dualistic to the non-dualistic level of consciousness, but it's very plain. So you can be thinking, you can be acting in the world and still in a state of primordial mind. It doesn't mean you can be out and about and doing things and talking and laughing and drinking and doing anything you want, but you're still in that state of pure awareness. So it's not like samadhi, where you tend to be in a state of very profound, thoughtless meditation. It's not that. You can be thinking. The Buddha himself said, I too use conceptual thinking, but I am not fooled by it. And that's the difference, that we are fooled by our conceptual thinking, but someone in a state of this pure awareness is not fooled. They see it's just thinking. Very useful, very helpful. We need to think. We shouldn't all be blanked out. But we don't have to think that there is somebody behind it doing the thinking. The thoughts come up and disappear like clouds in the sky. So yes, once you are always continually in that state, even during sleep, and even during that time of sleep, of deep sleep, if there's still that undercurrent of pure awareness the whole way through, without a break, then you're a Buddha. And until then, we're all walking the path. Hmm?
So we can be fully in line with awareness.
Mm.
How do I evolve into those flashes of thunder and lightning? Can I evolve into that? You said people get flashes.
Well, yeah, but that's not important. I mean, the
but
flash,
if I want to make
the main flash comes from, I mean, normally it's, in Tibetan Buddhism, usually it's pointed out by the teacher. It's called a pointing out instruction, where they, because of their own ability to stay in that state, therefore they are able to transfer that state to the student, if the student is open, right? One Lama said it was like a corridor with two doors at each end, and the Lama's door is open, but whether the student's door is open or not. But if they're both open, the student through their devotion and the guru through his accomplishment, if they are open, then the transference happens. And then at that moment, they see the nature of the mind. Of course, it all closes up again. But then they know what they're looking for, so to speak. So that, in that way, is considered to be the start of the path. To then recognize that nature and then to learn how. Because the problem is, as you can imagine, that the more I want to get that experience again, the further away it goes, right? Because the ego, the whole reason why you can't see it is because the ego's in the way. So when the ego wants to get that experience, then of course completely blocks it. And on the other hand, you have to want it, otherwise you're never going to get it. So that balance of not wanting, in order to relax the mind enough that we can see into its true nature is the balancing act.
Honestly, what you spoke the whole afternoon was exactly what I believe in.
Good.
But I was playing the devil's advocate in wanting some excitement in my life.
The point is that people who have experienced are quite surprised at the fact that it is a shift that we hadn't ever realized was within us. And to recognize that there is something so much more, we are so much more than what we think. And which is why it's said that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have universal compassion. They have compassion because they see we have such potential. And look what we do with it. And that we waste our lives again and again and again because we just don't see. And how sad, yes. So therefore, it's very important to do something meaningful with our lives and to really look into our mind and go step by step by step into uncovering deeper and deeper levels of our consciousness and not just stay on the surface of the ocean with the waves and the undercurrents, but really go deeper, deeper, deeper into the great ocean of the mind. So I think, unless anyone else has any questions, we do have a question. Okay.
Just a very small question, ma'am. What do you think about praschit? And praschit is when you inflict troubles on yourself because of some bad karma that you have done, in the hope of purifying your karmas.
What's it called?
Praschit. It's Hindi term. Repentance. Yeah.
What? You mean to like flagellate yourself because you're a bad person type of thing?
Something like fasting, something like
well, purification doesn't hurt. But I mean, it's not because you're trying to hurt yourself. Tibetan Buddhism especially is very keen on various purificatory practices. But it's not as a punishment. It's in order to create purification. And usually when people are doing it, they're very happy. Outside you might think, oh my goodness, they're fasting and they're not eating, they're not drinking, and they're doing all these prostrations, and oh, how awful. But everybody is smiling away because they're so happy. So it's not that we're trying to punish ourselves, but purification is good. Nothing wrong with purifying, as long as you're not harming yourself. Harming yourself is especially because people try to harm their body, but the body is innocent. It's the mind that's caused the body to do whatever it did. Why are we hitting the donkey when it's the driver that's the problem? Isn't it? The poor old body is just doing the best it can, to carry on with our very, very naughty little monkey minds. Mm? But of course, it is understood that, for any negative karma we have, there are purificatory practices which we can undertake and which can be very helpful. But they're not undertaken in a spirit of punishment, but in a spirit of, like, you wash your clothes because you want to have nice, clean clothes, and not because you're trying to punish the clothes for being dirty, right? So usually people who are undergoing purificatory practices are very happy about that and the opportunity to do so. We don't need to punish ourselves. We have enough problems in the world without that. Nothing else? Okay, then we end it here. I don't know how many of you have the opportunity to come back tomorrow and follow on the text, but those of you who do, you're very welcome. We start again at 4. And those of you who don't, never mind, you have the text, so think about it. There is a wealth of wisdom in Atisha's text. The next few verses are dealing with what are called the paramita, which are the qualities which we need to generate in order to become a Buddha. It's not just it's not just meditation, and we also need to acquire other qualities. So it starts with generosity, and then ethics, patience, enthusiastic efforts, and then meditation, and then wisdom, which comes from the meditation. So all these qualities. But Atisha gives a little spin on each one, which is very nice. And I think mostly from dealing with this text, I became very fond of Atisha. I think he has a puckish sense of humor, which is rare in spiritual texts. But anyway, it's very, please look over these lines and think about them and contemplate their meaning, because they're very profound, his way of dealing with each of these qualities which we need to walk on the spiritual path. So we will end here for today. Yes, on the other hand, by Tony Padana Panzene, Tekana Diabala to buy is a bizule, what do I show? Jamba Bawa Jida, Jamba Dankunto, somebody on the Jinde, Dida Kunji, Dollar Jinke, what did I Jira to Chancho Senjorimbo, Chimache Bana, Jiju, and Yamba, me by Angone, Gundu, Pao, show. In Buddhism, whenever one does anything which is considered to be good or meritorious, then the custom is to dedicate the merit. So the fact that you gave up today to come here to listen to this talk is considered to be a good thing to do, whether you consider it a waste of time or not. Anyway, you did it. So this is considered to be, creates good karma. And that is called punya. So this punya, if we say, like, we made this much punya today, so then something good happens and I drink, and then all the punya's gone. That's the end of that punya. But if we empty this liquid into the ocean or a big lake, then it will never run dry. And so therefore the custom is to dedicate the merit for the well-being of all sentient beings. And since all sentient beings are limitless, therefore also the aspiration and the punya is limitless. So that's what we just did. Thank you very much.